Hello everybody who's joining us this Tuesday afternoon or late morning, depending on where you're joining from. We are super excited to present this webinar on sales, order, and inventory automation. We will get started shortly. In the meantime, though, we'll let everybody join and trickle in. So as we do that, I would love to hear where everybody's joining from. You can use the chat box or the Q&A box on your webinar panel to let us know. I myself am joining from Toronto, and we're having really interesting weather today. It's like super sunny and hot, but then also a drizzle of rain and like strong wind. So I don't know. The weather's having a bit of a identity crisis. Lance, where are you joining us from?
American Fork, Utah. It's like 40 minutes south of Salt Lake City, not too far from Fishbowl.
Nice. And Ryan, whereabouts are you?
Yeah, so I'm in our offices in Orem, Utah. So, yep, just south of Salt Lake City. We're having a nice day today. It's sunny, and we're going to be in the 60s today. So, welcomed after the winter, always to get this spring weather for sure.
Nice.
Do you think the
And
last frost is over yet? Do you think there's going to be any more freezing?
We're always due for one or two spring storms to come through, right?
Yeah.
we got Melissa from Florida, Bailey from Washington. People coming in from everywhere. Okay, so we are a few minutes after the hour. And Nelson, I believe you are next door to me, unless you've
Yeah,
moved
I'm not
somewhere.
far away. I'm not far away, definitely. So, in Toronto, Canada, although there is a storm today, I don't think there's any ice in the forecast. It's like balmy 80 today, 80 degrees, 25 degrees Celsius outside, so it's a little bit wild.
Gotcha. Sweet. Okay, so with that said, we are going to get started. Um, Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. We will run through introductions. And as we do that, I encourage everybody to introduce themselves in the chat as well. Let us know what type of business do you run. Um, and for our panel today, we have a whole slew of experts with decades of hands-on automation experience to talk you through some of the best practices and actually dig into the workflows that you have. So first up, we have Lance Brando, founder of Brandow Consulting. Lance, are going to be our implementation and workflow realist, I would say, here to keep us honest, given that you have nearly 20 years, I believe, of experience with business automation, including
Yep.
stuff around QuickBooks-based businesses and others, designing those custom workflows that connect everything end to end. We also have Ryan Woodbury, the Strategic Partnerships Manager from Fishbowl. Ryan, you're going to be our inventory ops and warehouse management expert. So excited to hear what you have to say after working the trenches of the purchasing, logistics, and warehouse ops. Um, and then last but not least, we have Nelson joining us, who is the Senior Director of Sales and Services at Method with over 15 years of experience helping SMB, small businesses streamline their operations and connect that sales and services workflow. So he'll be speaking on bridging those CRM gaps. Without further ado, I want to run through a couple of housekeeping items. So first up, the session is being recorded. You are going to get a link to the recording after. Second up, the webinar is live, so please do not hesitate to ask us your questions. And then we will have a Q&A towards the end, actually pretty quickly because we received a ton of questions during registration. We'll be answering all of those. And then I see Andrew mentioning that chat does not allow comments. If you're not getting to comment in the chat, just send the comment or question in the questions box. So that would be the one that looks similar to the chat box, but with a little question mark. And if chat works for you, then great. Okay, so moving on, our agenda today, we're going to take a quick look at what good looks like when it comes to automation in 2025. We're going to walk through a couple of examples from experience. And then we're going to focus on number one, pinpointing where your bottlenecks are with automation and with your business workflow, and then answer the questions, those that you've already submitted. Again, we received a ton of them, and then any that you submit during this webinar. We actually have folks from Fishbowl, from Brandow Consulting, and from Method in the chat, in the background, who are ready to tackle any questions that you might throw at us with the question box. So don't hesitate to add those in, and we will get back to you. Then we're going to cap off things with the common pitfalls to avoid, specifically from Lance's experience with automation. A quick look of the type of things that we heard about, the type of things that people want to know on this webinar. People want to know about inventory, lots of Fishbowl and QuickBooks and finance questions. A lot of you wanted to talk about your entire workflow, and we're going to walk through a couple of examples there. And then you can see some of the rest here, sales work orders, method questions, costs and adoption. So we'll try to tackle all of those today. So to kick things off, I want to start with a quick statistic. This was something that came out after the pandemic when everybody was going online, and this was on people's minds. 66% of small businesses were saying that automation is essential to running their business. So that's 2 out of 3. That's a ton. I want to throw this maybe to you, Lance, because you've worked with businesses for such a long time in this automation space. From your experience, are you finding that this is still accurate? Like, are businesses really desperately running towards automation? Have people become more sophisticated in the way they think about automation? Or has the kind of fever after the pandemic receded a little bit? What have been your general observations in your business?
If anything, I think the pandemic just launched this even more into a whole new world of e-commerce entrepreneurs and small startups, right? Because now with technology, we can adopt drop shipping and outsource manufacturing, and we can leverage tools to help us decide what to buy and what to manufacture, like a pro, when we're really just a beginner e-commerce guy. We're working in our little solopreneur office, hopefully making $1 million. So automation, I think, has really advanced a lot in the past few years.
Yeah, it feels like you can. Sorry, go ahead.
I was just opening the question to everybody. What would you agree? What do you think?
Yeah, definitely. I think what beyond automation is just really reevaluating your existing systems and identifying if there are opportunities to automate elements. Obviously, as you go down the automation path, there's that decision tree of, is this something that should be automated? Shouldn't it be automated, and assessing it. So, you're constantly evaluating your tech stack, you're constantly evaluating your processes, whether that's on the distribution side or the manufacturing side, just constantly going through an audit of how can we get more for less, and automation is a way to achieve that. So definitely hearing more and more of that.
Yeah, and on the Fishbowl side, thinking back a few years ago, we would have customers that were adopting 3PL services for fulfillment, that had some e-commerce connectivity, but every year it increases. The customers that are wanting 3PL services connected in for fulfillment, the e-commerce connectivity, it's the rule now, not the exception, and that just keeps growing and growing every year. Especially for businesses that were maybe traditional, selling through wholesale and distribution model, business to business. The landscape has changed, right? And so now I still maintain those channels, but I also have a direct to consumer route through my own website, and I'm doing fulfillment through Amazon, and I have a couple 3PL warehouses scattered throughout the country, and you really want to have a system that is able to help the business grow and manage all those kind of disparate systems and bring them together.
Awesome.
And as small business owners, um, we got to kind of forget about the old robot image when we think of automation. I don't know what you think about when you think of the word automation. If you're thinking about a robot doing your picking for you or your manufacturing for you, that does not happen in the small business owner world, right? So that's not the automation we're talking about. I think the two things that come to mind at the forefront when thinking about automation and leveraging software to help us automate is Ryan mentioned Amazon. That makes me think about automating sales capturing and sales funneling, right? Automating data entry of that. But then also, what I find a lot of small business owners don't think about, don't realize that they can leverage software for is helping to automate or accelerate um, better informed, well informed business decisions, right? Man, I don't know if you guys are geeking out with AI lately, but holy smokes, if you haven't talked to ChatGPT lately, I highly recommend it. But, we can talk to Method, we can talk to Fishbowl, we can talk to QuickBooks and ask these software programs and ask these software programs what we should buy, what we should produce, what our most popular products are. Um,
Exactly. It's almost
yeah.
like there's so much automation that sometimes you don't know where to even begin or where to choose from. And I think that's what a lot of this webinar is going to be about. So I want to keep moving to our next section with just a quick overview of a few examples of real world results that were achieved with Method and Fishbowl and some of the pivotal moments there. So super high level. I know that people are ready to dig into the exact specifics with their workflow, and we're going to get to that in a few minutes. But before that, I'm just going to throw it over to you, Nelson, to chat through the Waring Williams story and what they accomplished with Method.
Yeah, Waring Williams, one of my customers that's near and dear to my heart. Um, they're basically a wholesale distributor of construction materials, anything from sealants to custom built equipment that is used to store construction equipment. What's exciting about them and what's nice to hear about them is they were a relatively mature company. And so mature companies are often set in their ways, whether that's old systems or, things that worked and they often don't assess. And over the last few years, something I alluded to earlier is this audit on their tech stack to evaluate, are we as efficient as possible? Is our system scaling alongside our business? And if not, what are the opportunities for automation to kind of sit alongside to support our business practices, but not necessarily replace them, as Lance said. So what's exciting is they had a offline system, and believe it or not, a lot of SMBs still like that comfort of working offline and bringing their information online is one of the biggest steps you can make. And a lot of us on today's call have made that step, which is great. But in addition to that, they also had a number of problems around chain of custody. So because they were in the construction world, they would get a number of POs from a variety of customers who, wanted sealants or would order things on demand, and there would be a delay to invoicing. So while they were able to provide that customer with those products, there would be this delay of invoicing and sort of this back and forth around, our team didn't use this, our team didn't pick this up. So it obviously led to discrepancies on the warehouse side because there's missing inventory. There's this limited transparency of customers. Were they getting those items? Were they effectively stealing or, maybe misremembering, for lack of a better word? So what's interesting is that in their workflow, where they found the opportunity to automate was creating a order system, super simple, where end users or construction workers could then come in, order. There's something called the chain of custody where people would sign off for that PO, sign off for that pickup, make sure there's a signature associated with it. And once that pickup was essentially fulfilled, once it was delivered, in most cases, an invoice was automatically issued to the end users. And while this doesn't necessarily work directly with inventory, it did allow them to manage their inventory more effectively because the lead time to the invoicing and the delivery of those products was so great before. At 2 to 7 days, there's just overlapping invoices, overlapping requests that made it really difficult for them in an offline world. So even something as simple as adopting an online system where customers can log in and self-manage and self-serve or look up historical transactions is a huge step forward in automation that I think we could all make in SMB world. Sometimes it's easier to stick to paper, but we should really move away from that as much as possible.
Thank you, Nelson. And I love that you bring up the fact that this kind of piece didn't necessarily touch the inventory side directly, and we're about to jump on that with Ryan's example. But there's still this downstream effect and we're going to see how that's mapped out in just a few slides. But before that, I'm going to throw it over to you, Ryan, to chat through basin upfitting and what they accomplished with Fishbowl.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. Manas. Yeah, Basin's a local company here, just north of us in Salt Lake City, and they're kind of a cool shop. They specialize in these truck systems, kind of like you see at the bottom of upfitting for work vehicles with cranes and tool storage systems and compressors. So essentially, what they do is they receive trucks from the likes of like Dodge and Ford, and then they'll have these orders to turn them into these work vehicles like you see out on the road for plumbers and different trades, right? And what it was kind of like death by 1,000 paper cuts for these guys before, because what was going on was they had spreadsheets that they were trying to manage everything out of in conjunction with QuickBooks, and they were running into a lot of stock out situations, or they were in situations where they had way too much inventory of one thing that just wasn't turning the way that they needed to. And you can imagine for a company like this, that's expensive inventory. These are not little cheap, inventory pieces that we imported out of, overseas. While we have customers that do that, these are complex vehicle systems that, needed some really good inventory capabilities and forecasting capabilities. So, they went out, looked at the market, and found Fishbowl and implemented the system. And what was really exciting, we went up to their site, did a day of on-site videos, and produced a video. If anybody's interested, can go check it out on our site. But they got to the point where they can turn their inventory, and they do turn their inventory monthly, which is just astounding because, again, these are complex systems, right? And the power of that from the automation really came for them on the purchasing side and the forecasting side, right? They were able to really dial in and maximize cash flow so that they had, we talk about lean manufacturing, lean ordering. They were able to implement it by having visibility into what their demand really looked like as a business, so that they could not have inventory dollars tying up capital sitting on the shelf that wasn't moving, and then being able to turn the orders in a meaningful way and quick way. And one of the things that was really exciting as we were talking to them, they're like, yeah, we're doubling our business this year. This is, I wish I could share their revenue targets that they were mentioning to us, which I'm not going to, but it's exciting. It's meaningful to businesses. The last thing I want to say is, maybe before I think, some of you think, well, Fishbowl is maybe a little bit too big for me. We specialize in this SMB space. So we go anything from, companies that are a few $100,000 in revenue, really just kind of starting up, to, millions of dollars in revenue. And it's really capable to handle businesses of all sizes in this SMB space.
Thank you, Ryan, for that overview. Yeah, I love seeing actual numbers and the way that some of these implementations affect a business, especially when there's so many moving parts and you want to scale up the operation. It's like a necessity. And we're going to shortly in the webinar, hopefully try to help somebody think through how they can scale up their operation. We have a question from one of the attendees that has a very manual workflow. So we're going to start diving into some of these workflow examples. But before that, I just want to launch a quick poll, a little self-assessment for our audience members on how hands-off you would say your workflow is. So I'm going to launch this now, and you should see this take over your screen in just a second. So that poll should be coming up, and it's on a scale of 1 to 5. How hands-off is your workflow? And I'm seeing the responses are starting to come in. Excellent. We're just going to give that maybe about 30 seconds to take a look at what people are saying and then close the poll off. So far, nobody's clicked 5 end-to-end automation, which makes sense. You wouldn't be on this webinar if you maybe you'd be running the webinar.
Yeah,
Actually,
what's
if you do have
exciting
end-to-end,
is I was gonna say what's
right.
exciting is, we have some that are like 2s and 3s, and I think really trying to figure out like, okay, hey, how do we take the next step to improve our efficiency and operations? It's kind of cool.
Yeah, it's really, really awesome to see. Okay, so I'm just going to give this 10 more seconds. If you haven't answered the poll yet, please drop your response in. 2, 1, 0, and ending the poll, sharing the results. So I'm just going to give it a couple of seconds for those results to show up, but I can read this out. As manual as it gets, 8% of the respondents, 42% out of 2, 48% out of 3, and 5% out of 4. So we have a small section of the audience that is almost there. Just need to make a final push. And yeah, as you said, Ryan, it's really interesting to see how many people have this opportunity to automate and really transform their business. Okay, so closing this poll and moving on to the next section, which is all about identifying the bottlenecks. So before we talk about the actual automation, here's what you want to implement, here's the software, here's how it should connect between QuickBooks, here's how it should connect to the inventory side, to the CRM, maybe some of your distribution tooling, whatever your stack is. I think it's really important to think about the workflow abstractly, because this is how you ultimately decide where to plug things in, how to rip and replace stuff. Maybe you don't need to rip and replace everything. And so this is an example workflow. It's pretty comprehensive, but going all the way from somebody coming into your business and asking you for work or for help, all the way down to reporting and forecasting. And so I want to actually throw this to you, Lance, because we had some of these discussions leading up to the webinar around how you think about and diagnose a business when somebody comes to you and says, hey, I would like to implement some kind of software. Within this kind of scenario, what do you ask them? What should they be looking at to figure out, okay, maybe I should prioritize inventory, or maybe I should prioritize a CRM, or maybe it's something else with my, I don't know, QuickBooks workflow that's broken. What is your approach for identifying the biggest ROI points along this workflow?
So first of all, I get the preliminaries out of the way. I call it the company profile. You know, how big are you? What's your annual revenue? How many employees do you have? How big is your warehouse? What do you do? Do you manufacture or do you not manufacture? Do you focus on e-commerce? So I just do a bit of getting to know you interview, right? And then part of that getting to know you interview also is workflow. Like, how do you capture your sales? How deep is your manufacturing? How many sub levels do you have? How many bills of material do you have? Where do you buy from, overseas or locally? How many people are in your warehouse? How many material handlers do you have? How many sales reps do you have? Um, how how long does it take to make for your customers to pull the trigger from lead to customer conversion or from opportunity to sales conversion? How long does that take? What's that lead time? And I'll ask them, what are your pain points? What are your problems? What are your goals? Like, what problems are we trying to solve? What goals are you trying to achieve? Right? And that's those are basically the questions I ask in our discovery interview that could, take an hour or two, depending on how large of a company I talk to. Typically, we help businesses between 3 million to 50 million, or 3 employees to 150 employees, 200 employees, right? That's kind of the size of companies that we help. And I always try to refer back to our goals and our problems that people first brought up, because in that first appointment, usually people bring everyone from all departments in the room, and you hear everyone's complaints and gripes and frustrations, right? And I like to organize our projects based on workflow, okay? And I like to solve problems and achieve goals by organizing our conversations by workflow. And so we have a list of workflows up here. Mattis has a list of workflows up here on this board. Love it. This is kind of how I think when I'm talking to people. And we've got some red squiggly lines. Those are some areas I would think, okay, that's an example of a bottleneck that we identified. And bottlenecks can identify themselves in different ways. One way, I think, is what I mentioned earlier in a previous meeting with Mattis, is I call them pileups. Pileups. Now, I kind of got this vision, full disclosure, from a book called The Goal. Now, many of you may have heard of it, many of you may not have heard of it. It's by Eliyahu Goldratt. And to say how old this book is, this was back when I was in college. So what's that, 30 years ago? 30, 35 years, 25 years ago, something like that, right? But I think the concepts, the theory of constraints, still holds true. And it's a good read. I'll just put that little plug out there. Make a note of it, write it down somewhere, right? But yeah, I think it's important to discover the bottlenecks. Where are the pileups? And the pileups can be in the form of orders, in the form of data. They can literally be in the form of inventory in the production area, like the book The Goal talks about, right? But when I'm working with my clients, some examples that I can think about is, who's complaining the most? Who feels like they're overwhelmed and their boss has unrealistic expectations and they just can't do it and there's no way? Now, this is a serious problem because data is going to suffer. And if one person is overwhelmed and we don't jump in to help with either automation resources or other human resources, then we're going to suffer with mistakes. And especially in the inventory world, which is where Ryan and I live, it's a passing the ball through the line type of workflow, literally. And if one place in the workflow has a kink, then it's going to snowball, right? If let's say if receiving is overwhelmed or undertrained, and they're making mistakes, then that's going to make the picker's life miserable. And if data gets off, then purchasing isn't going to be able to make informed decisions. Sales won't know if you have the inventory to sell or not, or what's coming in. Like, it literally is a snowball effect. And I think too many people undervalue the material handlers and underestimate the value of the material handlers, right? Everyone's job is super important, or a kink in the bottleneck really will just kind of spin out of control. Sales is another area. Do you have a sales rep that is manually keying in tons of sales? How many sales are they manually keying in per day? And that's a good ROI measurement as well. How much does that person get paid? How many hours is that person working per day? Okay, would it make sense to spend X number of dollars on an API bridge to bridge this software with that software to automate the data flow? No, it doesn't. Okay, sorry, keep plugging in the information. Or, oh yeah, it does. That would actually save us a ton of money. Okay, well, let's find Susie Q something else to do, right? She might think she's losing her job, but she's not. She's just going to move on to something else, right? But then another way I think to discover a bottleneck is kind of a void, kind of an absence. How do I explain this? Lack of meeting your goals, I guess, kind of a suspicion, a hunch. Like one area I can think about is with sales conversion rates. And this is where Method shines, where what is your customer's lead time to conversion? Closing the sale. How long does it take to close the sale? So if you're selling parts or pieces of equipment that are worth $100,000, and so your sales order is a value of $100,000, and it takes 6 months to close that deal or 12 months to close that deal, you need something to track that. You need something like Method to give you automated follow-up reminders, and follow-up becomes your new sales skill. You should keep in touch with that person with email campaigns, just friendly information to keep in touch so they don't forget who you are, because that literally can happen, right? They got a quote from you 5 or 6 months ago, and they've forgotten who you were. Who did we get that quote from? And they're going to re-Google and maybe find your competitor. So it's super important to keep in touch with them and follow up and leverage the software to help you do that. So
Thanks, Lance.
yeah.
Yeah, I really appreciate that overview, and I think all of us have dealt with cases where maybe we're trying to get some work done even in our own personal lives. Or we're talking to a couple of different vendors. I know I've personally seen experiences where, yeah, 100%, I just forget who that person was that I spoke with if they're not constantly chasing me. The other thing I think that we talked about was how some of the things that break can not show up until much further down the line. Like perhaps if your order entry process somehow is broken, it might take you until like invoice and payment to realize that it's broken. In the meantime, it's ran through the entire workflow in this convoluted manner. Ryan Nelson, anything to add? Ryan, maybe to you first, just quickly, and then we'll jump to the actual cases that people have submitted.
Yeah, I guess I would add there's usually like an inflection point in a business that really is stifling growth, right? So often folks come looking for more automation because I've just landed a big order, and do I have the capability to actually fulfill it? Or I need access to capital, and my bank is saying I need to have audit capability on what my actual inventory is, and we're kind of a mess. You know, I need that capital in order for my business to survive and thrive. And so there's usually these inflection points that are limiting growth, right? And these are the types of problems that you can solve for through these inventory solutions. You know, from the method side of managing campaigns and continuing outreach, and then having those orders flow through to your order management solution for efficiency on picking, packing, and shipping, and keeping that constant communication loop all through that supply chain. You know, that's really the world we live in and what customers expect. And it's become accessible to SMBs. It's not a solution that you don't have to be a $100 million company to solve for that these days. All SMBs have a capability through this to solve for these bottlenecks and these pain points and grow through these inflection points.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then see real ROI. Sorry, go ahead, Brent Nelson.
No, I was just going to agree with both Lance and Ryan there. I think there's the inflection point. There's the pain. I think a lot of us will run into situations like these and we'll solve with people. And you'll solve with people until it gets to a point where it doesn't make sense to solve with people. And then that's where automation and systems come into play, right? And it helps. You still need people to count through inventory, but the day-to-day management of inventory is something you can certainly automate along the way. So yeah, definitely you want to hit those pains, and it's generally the pains we're solving with humans today that we want to address, because a lot of us don't want to sit back on a Saturday counting through inventory or reviewing orders to see if we can fulfill them on the weekend, when there's no inventory plan to come in until next Tuesday. And so those kind of situations and taking those particular pains that impact our employees, our people who are servicing our customers, is absolutely critical.
I love that. Bringing it back down to the actual, like what is happening on the ground floor with the business. So we're going to move on to the next section, and it is potentially our final section on the all the questions that have been submitted. We also have this self-assessment chart. We'll share this with you after the webinar. So if you're thinking about, okay, there's a whole bunch of workflows, how do I actually think about what is broken, what's not broken? We'll share this out to you after. You can kind of go through the list and think through, okay, is this automated? Is this not automated? How am I doing for each one of these workflow steps? That said, I want to get into the questions. Again, we received a ton of questions, so we'll try to tackle them in groups as much as possible. If we don't get to your specific question, we will be following up after this webinar as well. Also, if questions come to mind as we're going through this, don't hesitate to post them inside of the Q&A box on the GoToWebinar panel. As mentioned, our friends will help answer those. Okay, so the first question, and we picked out a couple that we thought were the best questions because of how much detail they went into. And this first one is from Savannah, where she actually describes her full workflow. So they have a manual process to collect payments for items that they don't have inventory of. So they print vendor invoice via email, enter that into QuickBooks exactly how the bill reads. They find the customer's sales order, add tracking info, send the invoice to the customer or just run the card that's on file. And then those bills are paid on or a week of due date. The bills are filed away and stored in the current year's box, literal box of paperwork to keep for their records. They've been in business for 13 years and are doing 5 million in sales volume with that manual workflow. I'm gonna throw this one to Lance to start with. What stands out to you here the most?
I wish we had Savannah to talk to and clarify questions and ask her about this. But I mean, I guess she starts out by saying collecting payments for items we don't have inventory of. I find that's interesting that she says that, because my first thought is, what does it matter whether you have inventory of it or not? Maybe she's in a world where that's a problem. But it sounds like she's dealing with a feature limitation in whatever software program she's using. Like, we shouldn't have a problem collecting payments from customers for items we don't have, right? Whether we have the item or not, honestly, shouldn't matter. Unless the customer expects an instant response. So that might be just trying to meet our customers' expectations. And maybe that's what she's talking about is we're struggling to meet our customers' expectations. We're struggling with shortages and outages. And that kind of brings me to, the most popular bottleneck that I deal with my customers, which a lot of small business owners don't realize is easily solved with with software these days because they think, oh, I'm a small company, the technology doesn't exist for me, but actually it does. Replenishment technology, demand forecasting technology, reorder points, minimums, reorder points, and maximums. It exists, and I can't tell you how many business owners just assume the software doesn't do it, and they need an ERP software that they can't afford, so they despair and they think, well, shoot, and they just totally miss that. No, actually, 90% of small business inventory management software has predefined healthy stock levels and replenishment tools that you can leverage and use. So then let's go through our other process. Print invoice through email, enter into QuickBooks exactly how the bill reads, vendor invoice via email, print it out. Not sure why she's printing that out. Entering into QuickBooks exactly how the bill reads. So this should just automatically flow, and the vendor's bill actually goes into the inventory management software, and then the inventory management software should be connected to QuickBooks and push over. And the customer sales order should be in the inventory management software. That's where it belongs, because a sales order is an inventory management tool. It's not really an accounting tool. It's actually a non-posting transaction. So that's primarily just for inventory management. But it's interesting how she's got her workflow written up. And I think it's important to write your workflow while you're learning the software. This is another thing I do with my clients is we write down what I call a desired overall workflow, right? So businesses may think of their workflow in a certain way, and it's important to marry your workflow with the software and make best practice decisions on how you're going to use that software, and write those best practice decisions down, and then put those decisions to the test. Now Savannah's is in a $5 million company. I don't know how many employees she has. That would be a good thing to know, and how big her warehouse is. But that tells me that they're big enough that they're not a plug and play, right? They shouldn't just buy the software, set it up, plug it into QuickBooks, and start using it. They're kind of past that, and they really should put some careful thought into how they're going to use the software, because there's not just one way to skin a cat. A lot of these software programs like Fishbowl, super robust, has a lot of different options. And so we should carefully go through each individual workflow and decide which feature are we going to use, and which default setting are we going to turn on, and which one are we going to turn off, and what user rights are we going to turn on and turn off. And I like to set up a sandbox. So that's another key thing that a company this size and definitely larger should do is don't look at it as a plug and play, but as okay, we're going to get the list type data in there first, and then put the list type data to the test with mock transactions. So we're kind of going through a test run, a sandbox, right? And then we can go through each one of these processes. Print vendor invoice via email. That's honestly interesting. I don't know why anyone would print out a vendor's invoice. Enter QuickBooks exactly how bill reads. I'm thinking the bill should have been entered into the inventory software, and then the inventory software should automatically put it into QuickBooks. Find the customer's sales order. That's interesting. Why do we have to look for the customer's sales order? So typically, depending on your volume, right, the picking process is different. High volume, low margin business model requires maybe a picking manager, a warehouse manager, to look at inventory availability and the date it's scheduled to go out, or at least the date the order came in. So we can prioritize based on first come, first serve and availability to decide which sales orders need to be picked, packed, and shipped out that day. Tracking info. Okay, it sounds like they might have lot numbers or serial numbers. Okay, so maybe they need a mobile device to scan things. Send invoice to customer. So this is an area that is kind of custom. Not everyone sends the invoice before shipping, but I think that's becoming more and more popular these days to have a deposit invoice or um, a pro forma invoice, right? Which is not yet AR according to general accounting principles. It's not AR until it's shipped, right? So some things to talk about there. Bills are paid on or a week of due date. Okay, so we're into the accounting software using AP management to decide, making sure we pay the vendors bills and maybe also confirming that we actually receive the inventory, because a lot of people don't like to pay the bill until you get the inventory, but depends on your relationship with the vendor. Bills are filed away and stored in the current year's box of paperwork. Oh, I'm going to pull my hair out when I read that. I'm against paperwork. I'm sorry. I know a lot of people are still married to paperwork, but the software does it, and you can load up the paperwork or the PDF into the software these days. Like, oh, there is a place for paperwork, but usually after the usage of the paperwork is done, we throw it away. But I know some people might cringe. I don't force my ideals on anyone, but full disclosure, I read that and I cringe. I'm like, yeah, paper. Anyways, that's my raw response to this.
Appreciate it, Lance. Yeah, straight off the dome. It's interesting to me that they are doing so many things manually, in contrast to some of the statistics that we had earlier on in the webinar around how many, 2 out of 3 businesses say that automation is essential to actually operating. And I wonder how much this business could scale their operations if they invested a little bit more into the operation side. And Brian,
I was
I
thinking the
feel like you
same
want to.
thing. I was like, which one is Savannah? Was she a 1 or a 2? Like
Right.
reading this, I'm
Yeah,
thinking, I wonder what she considers herself.
yeah,
Um,
exactly.
yeah.
Ryan, you wanted to jump in?
Oh, yeah, I was just going to say, as you're evaluating solutions to solve for these problems, right? You want to be looking at where am I actually doing manual entry, right? And then find a solution that can solve for that, right? So I'm recording tracking info. Well, we can label and we can scan, and that drives accuracy and reduces stock out situations. We can connect to business portals so your customers can have real time access to your inventory quantities, and they can know and place orders, and then those just automatically flow through for fulfillment. And then sending pay now links on your invoice so that that's just the payment just flows through, or having a system that has the ability to store the credit cards and then you can do some recurring billing. All of that are things that you want to be looking at and evaluating in your systems, because they can all, and they're affordable, right? This isn't stuff that only, I need to go to NetSuite or some, Acumatica or SAP solution to solve for. You can solve for them in the SMB space.
Exactly. Exactly. I'm gonna move to the next example, and it's really more around kind of I'd call it implementation and adoption. And this is the best comment received from Kurt. And Kurt said that he's watched for years as companies try to sell better workflows with a given technology, only to see the tech bogged down by the business. So sales will say, "Hey, just get past the learning curve and it'll work out." But then he's seen these like horror stories of ERP integrations that have failed implementations, and then new tech comes in other companies and it just doesn't work. So he does not want to make these mistakes. And in theory, automation should be making things a lot more efficient. So how can you bridge this gap between just theoretically, okay, I have a workflow, I want to automate it, and actually making it into a reality? I'm actually going to throw this one over to you, Nelson. I know you've seen a really fair share, almost maybe an unfair share of implementations hands-on. What have you seen as kind of the key success factors for making sure that it actually works? And how have you kind of accomplished this with some of the stuff that Method does?
Yeah, one of the key project management steps that's required in every implementation is planning. And I think especially in the SMB space, we kind of assume we know everything off the get-go. And something that Lance alluded to earlier, writing down your workflow. Really, that's the first step to planning. And if you go through that every single day for about a week, you'll figure out you're missing pieces of the workflow that you didn't document. Maybe there's edge cases. The example of Savannah, how she manages inventory versus non-inventory could be two totally different workflows, but one is more common than the other. How she sources her vendors or how she sources those products. Maybe she treats them differently. Inventory products, maybe she has a specific vendor she works for or with to keep inventory on hand. But then for non-inventory, maybe she's more free flowing and she's looking across the market and looking for different vendors to facilitate that. So I think first and foremost, it's always planning upfront. And then what I like to approach it by is where's there the most pain? And again, Lance mentioned this before, but I have hired a team of people who are high performers or who understand the business really well. Where are they getting frustrated with our processes? Is there a particular person who wants to hold on to old ways, for job security, or are they doing that for a reason because they're trying to circumvent mistakes that often happen? And really just start by identifying those key workflows and automating them piece by piece. I think larger companies, uh, more on the medium to large scale enterprises, have the ability to spend 8 to 12 months planning before even starting to implement solutions. And when I used to do enterprise solutions, sometimes that planning phase used to go 18 months to 2 years, depending on the size of the organization, especially when you're working with engineering firms or people who do really custom manufacturing or custom build orders. So it really starts with planning. I love that piece of like I don't want to make those mistakes. As part of the process, mistakes will happen. How do you mitigate them? Again, it's just going through those edge cases, making sure everyone is bought into working on a ideal solution for the organization. And if not everyone is bought in, maybe there's an opportunity to just hyper focus on one particular piece, whether that's sales order collection, maybe it's the pick list, maybe it's just inventory management and making sure we have accurate counts on hand, and really making that a success story for your organization and expanding off of that to apply more. I don't know if Ryan or Lance, you guys have any concept on that, but I know I always struggle to get people to plan. They often assume you should know this, or this is the way every company does it, or the polar opposite of like I do things in such a unique way that I could never plan it out or I could never write it down. I just know how things work. So I'd love to hear how you guys work through implementations.
And I would just chime in to say, let's keep the answer super short because there are a couple of questions that I wanted to get to in the next slide as well.
Okay,
We're going to do
sorry.
a rapid fire, but but Lance in 30 seconds.
Yeah, I can do it in 30 seconds. ERP integrations are not IMS integrations. Okay. So we're with small business to mid-sized businesses right now. SMB businesses mainly implement or onboard IMS. And it's a great learning experience that you had at your ERP implementation, which is also called digital transformation. ERP implementations might be massive. Think about what company you came from, what their annual revenue was, and how many employees they had. Think about what company you're in right now. What's your annual revenue? How many employees you have? The implementation project size and scope is actually going to be close to what your size of your company is. Okay, so I would think, hey, your experience with a Fishbowl implementation is going to be 20 times better than your experience with a NetSuite implementation. You know,
Amazing. Thank you, Lance. So we are going to keep moving and try to tackle some of the top questions that we received throughout the sign up process. We did get a lot, as I mentioned, so we'll group them as best as possible. One of the big ones that we got a few times was around cost and comparison between some of maybe the more enterprise tools versus using a tool like Fishbowl and Method together with QuickBooks. I think this goes back to what you were talking about, Lance, in terms of the scale of ERP versus the tools that are more catering to the small business. What have you seen in terms of the cost differential, like putting a bunch of tools together and making them connect to each other versus doing an entire ERP implementation?
So an entire ERP implementation also includes the accounting portion of it. And I think this is why small business owners are attracted to IMS rather than ERP, because they can just stay on QuickBooks and then just plug in the IMS to QuickBooks. And um, there's three different sizes. There's an onboarding project, there's an implementation project, and there's a digital transformation project. The onboarding, few $1,000s, few weeks. Implementation project, maybe 10 grand and 3 months. Digital transformation, maybe 100 grand, 200 grand, and a year or two, right? It all just depends on how large your company is. And a stick in the mud, a ballpark, take your annual revenue and multiply it. This is for manufacturers and wholesale distributors. Take your annual revenue, multiply that by 0.1%, or if you're a manufacturer, 0.2%. Okay. And that could be a rough estimate of what your implementation project or your onboarding project could be, just for the inventory management portion of the implementation.
Appreciate that insight, Lance. I have a question here that was submitted during registration from Justin, and it deals with the kind of end-to-end automation. So this is going to be for you, Ryan, and for you, Nelson. So on the inventory side, Justin says, forecasting and stocking customer needs. We're trying to maintain a low physical inventory while dealing with multiple week lead times for new product to arrive. And then on sales, he says, we have little to no automation use. Salespeople, quote unquote, patrol inventory, deliver schedule, order status, and customer relationships by means of daily and weekly reviews of the database. So first up, Ryan, to you, for Fishbowl, forecasting, stocking customer needs, maintaining low physical inventory, how does Fishbowl tackle that?
Yeah, so Fishbowl's going to get smarter the more data it receives, right? So we're tracking your vendor lead times for every component, what your purchase history has been. We're suggesting minimum quantities based on and maximum quantities based on your usage over time, right? And so there's this MRP flow that happens in the software, and then automating purchasing for to restock and replenish, right? So there's this whole ecosystem that exists from a forecasting, replenishment to right size your inventory, and those tools are all readily available. Really brief, kind of quick, because I know we're coming up on time, but that is totally possible. And then there's much more sophisticated forecasting that is now readily available through the AI tools that are embedded in the solution as well. So really excited to have some of those conversations and do some demos and show you what that can look like for any of these businesses that are connecting here today.
Amazing. And Nelson, if somebody's running an operation, it's inventory or heavy or wholesaling, and their salespeople are just kind of opening up the system and checking the inventory stock as part of their process, how would you plug in some of Method's solutions into that?
Yeah, definitely. I think as a sales team, you should constantly be looking at inventory levels and addressing that, especially when there's a larger sales team. Some examples that I run into are we have a customer who supports lifts and automobile lifts. Part of their workflow is to sell and service spare parts. Another one is part of the construction sector. And so the sales team is constantly evaluating what do they need for construction and work orders and executing on the day to day, but also on the distribution side, and how does that conflict with one another. So just constantly keeping tabs on inventory and identifying, is there a problem? Are we trying to upsell a particular part? Something I've loved to do is when inventory levels get too high, like Ryan was saying, You start to roll in a commission plan, which is like, hey, how do we start burning through this inventory? How do we start incentivizing our sales team to work through some of this inventory in an effort to free up space or maybe to bring in new inventory on hand? So yeah, tons of tools available to help facilitate that and at least keep the whole team with their eyes on the prize.
Amazing. Thank you, Nelson. So we do have questions still that are very specific to the individual business that you are all running, and we have a ton of thoughts on them. But I think those thoughts would be better addressed on a one-to-one conversation in a lot of cases, due to the nuances, especially as Lance was mentioning of why are you doing this particular thing? Maybe you're printing out something manually, and perhaps it's cringy, but there's a reason why you're doing it. And then because we know the reason, we could suggest a better way of doing it. So um, two things to keep in mind. All the questions that you've submitted, we will be following up with answers and responses to those questions. If we didn't get to your question, I know a bunch of them have been answered in the Q&A chat box already. So expect to hear from us if you didn't hear back an answer. And then I would also suggest going to Methods, Fishbowl's, and Brandow's website and just booking a meeting with the teams in order to have a deeper conversation on what is happening with your business and how the platforms and the different workflow setups can help. So I'd encourage you to do that. And we'll cap it off there. Lance, any final thoughts as the workflow expert keeping us honest here on this webinar?
I love the small business owner, and I think all of us in this panel do. That's why we're in the business that we're in. We deeply care about the struggles and the pain that you're going through, and that's why we're all here. In all honesty, is I think many of us have the white knight syndrome, and we're problem solvers. And so I'm glad you could come today. I'm glad you could make it. Hopefully, the discussions you heard today were helpful and useful, and please reach out to us. We're here for you.
Love that. Nelson?
Yeah, I echo what Lance said. I think the first step to automating and getting help is to attend sessions like these, learn more. I don't think the expectation from us is for you guys to overnight decide to flip your business on its head, but at least start to consider where there are opportunities, who to talk to, what resources are available to you as a small business owner to learn more and maybe see how others are working through the same problems you are.
And Ryan?
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity to chat with you guys. And, we would love to have the opportunity to help your business grow. Our success is tied to your success, and we are deeply invested in helping you become successful. So if there's problems that you're experiencing, reach out. Let's solve them together.
Love it. Okay. Well, thank you everybody for joining us. I hope that you have a lovely rest of your Tuesday and the rest of your week. We will be sending out follow-ups with recordings and the resources mentioned in this webinar. I hope to see a lot of you soon again in one of our next upcoming sessions. And thank you to our panel, and thank you to all of the friends who have been answering questions in the chat. Take care, everybody.